Afternoon, everyone. I hope you guys are staying hydrated, having fun. Who has learned something new this past 2 days? Raise your hand. Yeah, there we go. All right, guys. I have the pleasure and the honor to sit next to some gaming legends who have done incredible work over the course of their careers. Robbie, Justin, would love for you guys to introduce yourselves, and then we'll dive right into the conversation.
For sure. I'll keep mine short. I'm Robbie. I'm the co-founder of Immutable. I've been in the blockchain space since 2014, and we became obsessed with NFTs in 2017 and built the first ever on-chain multiplayer game. We realized pretty quickly that paying $200 in gas fees to battle your opponent was not interesting, and started working on building a scaling platform so other people could build Web3 games. Today, Immutable is over 300 people around the world. We have over 200 well-funded games building on our platform, and are the biggest platform for Web3 gaming globally. We've raised over $300 million from Temasek, Tencent, Bitcraft, and more. And obviously, we have our token, IMX. And we're really just focused on how do we have fun, mainstream, perfect user experience where you don't even know you're using NFTs under the hood.
Hey, okay, it's already on. Cool. Okay. Hey, yeah, I'm Justin. So basically, I've spent my career focused on how technology can connect people in new ways. So my first company I started was called Zynga. It's a mobile game company. We started off building social games on Facebook way back in 2007. Pioneered the business model of freemium games, so the idea of buying the objects in the game and making the game up front for free. That was a new idea 15 years ago, and now it's sort of the dominant business model. It's expanded the games industry a lot, and there's a ton of parallels between that and NFTs. So naturally, when NFTs got kicked off, and I met teams like Immutable team actually, when things were just first getting started, I got involved in a bunch of projects, and now I've got my own project that's trying to figure out what's the next wave of NFT adoption, and what does it mean for the art of game creation? So, yeah, really glad to be here.
Shout out to Justin, one of the best advisors ever. Started helping out Immutable very early, and is definitely part of our success today.
One thing to note is these two gentlemen are also some of the kindest human beings. So they're incredibly astute into what they do, but they're also great humans. Let's dive right into it. Guys, right now there is definitely some tension between traditional gaming, closed world gaming, and Web3 gaming. We're seeing a lot of questions whether NFTs should be part of these games, whether MMOs should even be built on blockchain. What is your take right now on that tension, and who's going to win?
I always love this question because the first thing I ask is, everyone talks in the blockchain space about whose bags do you own when you evangelize a particular product. Everyone's aligned with a blockchain or a game. Who owns the bags of protecting the $150 billion that's spent in a completely locked database? It's the existing incumbents and the services and ecosystems built around that. Because, of course, there's a huge incentive in some ways to sort of protect the system that they're currently massive beneficiaries from. And I think this is the way that any form of change is. It's well studied. Clayton Christensen, The Innovator's Dilemma, disruption has to occur through this paradigm. And, even free-to-play gaming, Justin knows this better than anyone, it faced huge backlash when it was first being generated. And it took those first hits in order to prove why this model was actually better. And, gamers are one of the most fickle audiences in the world. They will complain about every single thing you put in front of them. But at the end of the day, you just have to build an exceptional product or game that lots and lots of people use. The reason I'm so passionate about this, and the reason I think this will be the sort of inevitable paradigm that takes on, is it is a much fairer way for players to own their property. I think we've been sold this basically complete lie, which is just because something is intangible, you shouldn't have economic property rights attached to it. You should no longer be able to sell it. And actually that makes zero sense. There should be no reason why tangibility and intangibility should be the differentiation between you have 100% of economic value and you have nothing. Instead, it's just the system that has sort of been created by default. I think the inexorable trend of how gaming is evolving is you already have games competing for who has cheaper in-app transactions that are identical clones of each other. The next stage is how do you actually just make much fairer value for everyone. You see the same shift in creator economics with app stores, with streaming, with basically paying fairer value to people. So that's why this is sort of inevitable and why it's so important.
Yeah, I totally agree on that. And I think gamers aren't stupid. One of the things that people didn't understand about freemium was that it was just a much better deal. And if you look at over time, just the value that gamers get from the amount of money they spend, it's better than most forms of media. And the amount of time you can spend playing free games right now without ever spending a penny, I mean, you don't have a life long enough to get through all the content that already exists, right? So this idea that it's become more expensive when these payments have become optional is actually not true. And the people who play the games understand that. I think there's some associations that people have been a little bit confused by. They see, you know, the $69 million Beeple sale, they hear it's an NFT, and then they think of their favorite game where they're buying a premium item already, and they think, wow, these are going to get really expensive. And that's just not the case. That's not like what most people are looking to build. That's not really where this is headed. But they will come to understand the advantage. And every one of us probably has a hobby where you bought something and with no expectation of the thing that you bought going up in value, but later you want something new in that hobby. You bought a guitar, it's time to sell it and get a new one. You can actually get some of the money back. I think we're going to see a lot of that sort of thing start to happen. And for people who are spending $1,000 a month on games already, and they have the option between spending $1,000 that goes into a black hole and 70% of it goes back into Facebook ads to go get new users in the game, or to retain some of that value and even sell it and get back some of it after. We don't need play to earn to be better than the existing model. It's just not true. So people need to feel that value and then they'll start to get it.
I love, Justin, you touched on it. I wanted to talk to this because you also touched on it, Robbie, on the tangibility and tangibility. Play to earn was a huge conversation like 12 months ago, right? Axie Infinity took over the headlines. I think some people were making a true living on play to earn and exchanges. Is that going to come back? Is that a phase? And is that a tangible thing that's going to stick in Web3 gaming?
Yeah, it's been happening for a long time, right? So play to earn, or the idea that these economies are scarce, is an old one. And there was World of Warcraft, gold farming, and actually, like, I ran into some very, very early Bitcoiners who were taking our poker game back in 2007, playing it on Facebook, mining a bunch of chips essentially, and selling it to other people using eBay. And of course, we had to stop it from happening because if we didn't, then we would be considered online gambling at the time. But like this type of thing has been going on for a long time, right? And as long as there's a way for some people to put in labor to give value to somebody else who doesn't have the time and wants to exchange it for money, I think it's going to continue to happen. So whether or not it's sustainable in the sense of like a game economy is sort of a separate question, but there's always going to be some market of people who are willing to trade their time to create value and some people who are willing to trade their money to save time, right? And I think that that's at the heart of it.
What about you, Robbie? How do you feel about this?
So I think play to earn as a concept is dead. You can ask anyone, and that's the kind of ubiquitous opinion. I think play and earn, or variants thereof, are sort of where the industry is headed. I think the games need to be intrinsically fun and need to be intrinsically sustainable. And then there's this question of how you create sustainable economies. The deeper question, though, is how do we create a playbook so anyone else can easily create a successful Web3 game? And actually, again, Justin sort of told me this story first, but social gaming only really exploded once, Farmville and Mafia Wars, perhaps people played this in this room, I know I was obsessed with them back in the day, were created. And Mafia Wars was reskinned 10 or 15 times, the same underlying game design and leveraging of the social graph on Facebook in order to grow. They had a version of it for young girls that was like a hair salon, and we need that moment in Web3. Had Axie Infinity been a sustainable version of an economy, we would have 100 successful clones today, and we would be well on our way to this becoming the default paradigm for asset ownership. Instead, it didn't. And what we need is this, hit that proves out this is how other people, without having to hire 10 PhD economists, can very easily create sustainable economies. That's the reason why at Immutable, we do Immutable Publishing and Studios, where we actually create these economies for our own games so that we can share all of that IP for free with the games building on our platform.
All right, let's go into the next one. This is going to be a little hot topic that's been both navigating the NFT community, and I just found out today that it's a really hot topic in gaming as well. And speaking of economies, let's talk about creator royalties, right? What does creator royalties look like in gaming, and why are they so important?
Yeah, I'll jump in. So, look, I think the thing about creators is they're really the lifeblood of this space, and you have to think about it not like just how are we competing within blockchain with each other as creators and as people who are running businesses in this space, but also how do we make blockchain competitive with other technologies? And I think this is where a lot of the conversation has been lost. So if you were in these clubhouse rooms, a few years ago, when people were selling the idea of NFTs to artists, they were telling them, you're going to get royalties in perpetuity. That was part of every single pitch to every artist and every creator. And that was a very powerful pitch. It got a lot of them to pay attention. It got a lot of them to come into the space. And the same was true for a lot of these game developers, because from their perspective, it's over $100 billion a year that's being spent in these games they're already making. And so if you're telling them you're going to sell an item directly to the user the way you already are, and in many cases already making revenue, or you can use a new technology to do it, then what's really appealing about creator royalties is that they also get access to this secondary market that they didn't previously have. And when you pull that away, actually it's like pulling away one of the biggest selling points for why people should really be paying attention to blockchain as an incumbent. And so I think the biggest macro thing to me about this issue and the reason I hope it gets solved at a broader scale, and I know a lot of people are working on it, is because I think that the ability for us to grow the space is bigger when we can charge less for NFTs up front. And free NFTs are like the most marketable version of an NFT. And it's very hard to make a business built on free NFTs when there are no creator royalties. And so like what we learned with freemium and a lot of other things and free services on the internet is the marketing value of something that's free is not like 20% better than something that costs $1. It's like 1,000 times better. And so the ability to give away free NFTs to many wallets and people who've never been onboarded with crypto, and then to later monetize them in another way is pretty related to this idea of creator royalties. And so we've definitely hindered our ability to grow as a space when that problem is not fixed. So I hope people can see like it's a very complicated situation with the marketplaces, but when it comes to our biggest growth lever as a space, I think it's really important.
I think royalties are inherently pro-ecosystem and pro-interoperability because they allow creators to attach a price to usage of that property or intellectual property in multiple contexts. And they also create economic incentives for that. And the reason we're so passionate about royalties for game studios is precisely this problem of economic alignment. I always give the example of, Magic the Gathering or Counter-Strike Go are both two good examples of games with huge secondary market economies that the primary issuer or the company really can't tap into. In the case of CSGO, obviously Valve has this essentially database they run and they can kind of control that with impunity. But imagine a world where Magic the Gathering didn't have to create $30 million of cards every year and sell them and make all of their old cards less valuable, because instead they could just take 2% of every single trade of the $20 billion of estimated MTG cards floating in the world today. And suddenly their incentive is just make the ecosystem bigger, grow volume, and in perpetuity, make the game more successful. That is a fundamentally aligned business model where their incentive is the exact same as their players. So that's the reason why we're so pro-royalties. I think this sort of, the issue has been fraught by product limitations. The reason why OpenSea has had to make their recent decision is it's very, very hard to compete when you have this race to the bottom and other marketplaces are offering zero royalties, the Blurs of the world, the X2Y2s of the world. We actually think that enforceable royalties at a protocol level is necessary in order to support a safe ecosystem for marketplaces, a safe ecosystem for games to create royalties. Gabe Layden, the founder of Machine Zone, is incredibly passionate that royalties are a much better paradigm for game design, and they're so important for game developers to be able to monetize. So actually one of the main reasons game developers use Immutable today is we have enforceable royalties protocol-wide. We know it's really meaningful for our marketplaces because they can't be undercut. So it's something we're super passionate about.
Speaking of creator royalties, what do you guys think about the narrative that's going on right now that a lot of our ecosystem and a lot of the ecosystem in gaming has been very heavily botted? Like, how do you combat those elements where you can actually want to incentivize users versus users who are creating bots, right, to actually play the games and things of that nature? So, like, the vanity metrics are not necessarily the things that we want to look to.
Yeah, well, I think there's certainly no vanity metrics on players that anyone's really sort of shouting to the rooftops right now. I think the more appropriate one is as soon as you have an economic incentive like play to earn, it's going to be botted. My opinion is with AI, you're going to have human-level sophisticated agents that can play games pretty much generally without specific training in at least 5 to 10 years. So, this idea of Sybil resistance is a very difficult one. You can't make a game too complex that an AI won't be able to beat it in 5 or 10 years. We obviously have some really unique solutions to this. We have WorldCoin, where you can scan your retina, and maybe that will mean you can earn digital value in games more efficiently. Our approach is a little more, you have to assume that bots will exist and make your economy designed to be robust to them. But we also have things like, KYC and Immutable Passport, where we can kind of build out to futures where Sybil resistance might be really important for games, because it certainly is for a lot of them.
What are your thoughts, Justin?
Yeah, it's one of the hardest parts about this space, right? There's so many different types of actors, and everybody has different incentives. And I think the game industry, we've always had like some set of issues like that, but never at this scale, and never with people with this much capital and sophistication. So, it's been anti-cheat, and all these things have been part of the game industry for a long time. I think in this space, part of the reason that it's really a bigger issue right now is because some of these games haven't hit real scale yet. And so I do think if you actually get enough players in, then this becomes less of an issue, because probably there are a lot of things you can do to make sure that you're rewarding people who actually have gameplay patterns that are more likely to be real. And that will get more challenging over time, but you can reward people for lots of different things, and things that like computers wouldn't necessarily be better at. And so my hope is like game design is one of the ways to solve this, but I'm sure there's technology solutions too.
Yeah, man. I wanted to speak to this one right here. We saw, I believe, Daniel just left Activision, right, Blizzard, to join Yuga Labs to really focus on the gaming element of other side. What do you think is going to be the forcing function for the EAs, the Activisions of the world, to take Web3 seriously? What's going to be that forcing function?
Yeah, I think we'll see two approaches. So I think you'll see a lot of experimentation, and we're already seeing this today. We've already announced some of these big studios. We've got some coming up where they're genuinely really interested in making sure that when this does become the next dominant paradigm for how games develop, they know precisely how to build successful games. They're not going all in. They're not putting Call of Duty on the blockchain tomorrow, but they do want to be ready so that when the industry takes off, they know how to move. And then I think you actually have sort of slightly different AAA players who are very much wanting to be at the vanguard and popularizing this. I think a lot of those game studios are here in Korea. I think some of them are in Japan, where they view themselves at the vanguard of free-to-play shifts, at the vanguard of social gaming, and they see this as the next sort of paradigm shift where they can be the ones innovating and sort of at the cutting edge of this thing. So I think you have the hedging model and then the genuine pioneers. Both are useful, and we want to be ushering in both of those.
Yeah, there's been a number of companies that have been focused on it that have surprised me that they're starting to ship things. So like my former company Zynga is actually minting something relatively soon, and I think that the timing surprised a lot of people. I think ultimately these platform shifts are opportunity, right? And Activision is the biggest, so maybe they'll be the last. And usually what tends to happen is like people like Robbie succeed enough where they can't ignore it, and then eventually people have to come in late and they have to buy some companies, and that's kind of how the cycle typically works. But I think the way that a lot of people are thinking about it is if you're not lucky to be one of those giant companies right now where you can continue to ride with the existing business model you have, this is like a very disruptive technology. And actually it would cannibalize a lot of revenues for some of the players depending on how they rolled it out. So they're not exactly looking to. And this is the thing people forget. The opportunity with games is that people are already buying over $100 billion worth of virtual goods every year. And so there's no question like music and these other industries of like, what's the business model? How is this going to work? Are people going to buy these things? They already are buying this, and this will become more compelling once they're properly educated and the infrastructure is there. But that doesn't mean that the companies that are making the majority of that money are necessarily incentivized to give up some of it right now, because it's going to change the dynamics of their business a lot. And so I'm sure some of them that are more incentivized, that understand history, will see it as the opportunity that it is, will have some successes, and then everybody else will be playing catch up. And that tends to be the shape of the industry every 10 years or so, going back like 40 years at this point. So it's probably going to be the same here.
I want to talk about two topics, and we're going to go in them in order. But first, I would love to talk about IP and AI and how like that's going to disrupt a lot of world creations, right? Like real-time rendering, things of that situation. And then this is a topic, Justin, that you and I would touch base earlier yesterday with Naveen about privacy on the blockchain and that concept, because a lot of gamers are anon. a lot of the most successful gamers, we don't know who the fuck they are. You know what I mean? Like that, and that's by design. But let's talk about AI and what AI is going to do to the threat of IP and real-world creation in gaming. What are your thoughts on it?
I think in the long run, IP is probably dead, and some form of enforceable IP and sort of royalties is what's necessary in order to make sense of a world that's going to be so overrun with high-quality AI-generated content that can be produced for $0. So the most significant shift that I think AI is doing is, the fundamental principle of a business: commoditize your complements. The complement to gaming and entertainment is the stuff that you are gaming with or entertained by. That is the 3D models, it's the 2D art. We've seen the most significant shift ever in the history of cost structures in content in the last 2 years. For Gods Unchained, one of our trading card games, we used to spend $1 million a year on 2D art, illustrations. Now we spend $40,000. Thanks to Midjourney and AI GANs. And that cost structure has rolled out across the industry. Next is 3D models. After that, it's AI characters and full mods and maps. And I think the most successful companies in gaming over the past 15 years have been platforms which have leveraged the easier access people have to create any form of UGC. I think that works really, really well with the incentives we're creating in Web3, where you can, allow people to take clips on the assets that they've created the mod for, where you can create, royalties attached to this thing, where people are really incentivized to create high-quality content, and those platforms can become the most successful. In the long run, to quote from Jeff Bezos, their margin is our opportunity. And I think Web3 is taking this enormous margin that has been taken from creators, game developers everywhere, and is creating a far more powerful set of incentives, which is ultimately just going to win out. I think that's actually at the heart of what you're building with Playco and Storyverse.
Yeah, it is. And actually, it's interesting because this has happened also several times in this industry. You see something like Unity. It wasn't that long ago that every major game studio was rolling their own game engine. Can you imagine everybody had a several hundred-person team in their company that was just building a worse version of Unity? This is not 20 years ago.
I can't think of any analogy in the blockchain.
This is, five. I mean, really stopped 5 years ago is when they finally really started shutting all those teams down. And I think what we're seeing with AI is again, the same thing: more efficiency, more access. But usually with these things comes a new customer. And what Unity did was not only did it mean that Electronic Arts not have to build their game engine internally anymore, it also meant that a 4-person game studio was now fundable to make a game that looked kind of like the Electronic Arts game. And so the question to me with AI is what is the fundamental unit of a creator? And do we see in this shift not just efficiencies for the existing companies and a leveling of the playing field, but also a new definition of what it means to be a game creator? And I think Unity and Unreal are engines that are made for professionals. They're made for teams, and there are a lot of those teams out there right now, and a lot of people with those skills. And I think what we're probably going to see is a level of content creation that comes from people who are more like TikTokers. And so that's kind of what we're excited about at Storyverse is how do you connect the lines between the IP that people own inside of the Web3 experience already, stuff like Bored Apes and CryptoPunks, Pudgy Penguins, things you have commercial rights to, and those are difficult for you to go and do anything with. So on our site, you can license in the IP you own as an individual, and then creators can come and work with your IP to build actual games using a lot of these tools and tools we've built in-house. And the idea is that we can have creators that build games that stand on their own, much like artists have now come online in the blockchain. So if you think about this idea of art selling on the chain, it's a brand new idea for the internet. We didn't have an internet native business model for art for about 30 years. And then art came online, and now we just think it's normal. And so no matter what you think about the prices in the art industry, we did not have a solution for artists to engage in e-commerce in a meaningful way until about 3 or 4 years ago with NFTs, and now it's forever changed. This is the same cycle that went through games with freemium, was we didn't have a way to price games and sell them online in a way that made sense on the internet. Then freemium came along, and then you had 15 years of huge growth. So I think we're going to see this in other places, and I think game creators could be the next wave of, it becomes more and more about the individual and the patronage to the person and what they can do with these new tools.
That's a really awesome take, guys. So one thing that at NFT Now we believe in is that privacy is a fundamental human right. And it's very challenging on the blockchain when it's such a public ledger. Gaming in itself, it's become hundreds of billions of dollars being pumped in, and you now start seeing gamers' lives change, right? Like you're starting seeing pools of money, being in the tens of millions of dollars, very serious amount of capital being brought forth, and you start seeing stardom and fandom really become a thing, right? Like you're starting to see pro gamers have same, if not greater fame than some A-list Hollywood celebrities, right? Like in the cult followings. But let's talk about anonymity and privacy in gaming and why it's so important. And how are you guys choosing to protect that privacy and that anonymity that has been a cornerstone of gaming, right? Like you're known by your handle. You're not known by your government name. You're not known by your ID. How are you guys addressing the privacy issue that inherently the blockchain doesn't have?
Yeah, so I think the thing about blockchains is they're not anonymous, they're pseudonymous. I think it's a feature and a bug. And unless you're going to some sort of privacy-based ZK solution, which we could definitely roll out, I think that is going to be the nature of open blockchains, and it's part of transparency. For us, coinciding with privacy is self-custody by default. I think it's an incredibly important principle. And we make sure we do that in every single one of our technical decisions. Immutable passport, our wallet we just rolled out is you sign up in 5 seconds with email, but it is by default self-custodial. And so those are kind of two sides to the same coin for us. But I think the thing is, if you want to keep your wallet private, it's about making sure that no metadata that can attach to your personal name is ever attached to that account, which can be tricky over time.
So let me ask you, because you guys do KYC. You guys do, right?
Optionally.
Optionally. Yeah. Got it. Okay, great. So how do you protect that at KYC if somebody's saying like, hey, I want to be verified that I'm a human, but I want to keep my handle anonymous and I don't want my KYC attached to my handle?
I think if you want to engage in, say, a regulated game, and that game decides it needs to KYC its customers in order for them to be able to trade, you're not going to be able to participate in that anonymously. It's going to be very difficult, right? There's going to be some attachment to your name. Now, that's up to that company to keep that private. But I think that more broadly, the nature of wallets and self-custody is that you can generally just interact with the ecosystem permissionlessly, and you don't have to sort of go through those routes. So I think it's just you always have to tread this fine line of regulation and what's available versus privacy, but yeah.
That's awesome. How about you, Justin?
Yeah, I mean, for what we're working on, I think it's more around security, right? So like we are working with a lot of people who have like very valuable assets in the space. We have CryptoPunks licensing is live on our platform, and we've had a bunch of punks who've licensed in their CryptoPunks. We have about 1,000 apes who've licensed in, so I guess it kind of makes us like the largest IP licensing platform in the space. And obviously, we don't want to cause any security problems for those people, so we put a lot of effort into making sure that we're supporting all the different solutions that people use to check and verify these assets without causing issues for them. So we've partnered with Token Proof, and we're using Delegate, and we'll probably support Warm soon. So I wish there was part of this process has been educating people on this, because it's the first time they're excited. They're like, well, I can use my Bored Ape for something. How are you going to know I have a Bored Ape? I don't want to connect that wallet to this thing. And so there's some education there. But I think part of that onboarding we're doing for that layer is going to help everybody, because what we're noticing is, we checked, there was fewer than 1,000 CryptoPunks who've delegated to Delegate Cash, and Delegate Cash is like the most popular solution for this. So we're actually going to be onboarding a lot of these people in the process of giving them their first use case like this. So
that's really great. That's amazing. All right, guys, we have 90 seconds left. This is one of my favorite personal questions. It's not gaming related, but you guys are incredibly successful entrepreneurs. You guys have been battle tested. You guys have been taking companies to levels that people dream of. You guys are some people's dreams, Knowing what you know today, what is a piece of advice that you'd give yourself on day 0?
I think there's always great lessons on hiring when you're building your first big company that I would definitely kind of take back. I think keeping your bar incredibly high, which I'm very proud to say we do now. But there's always kind of early mistakes you make, and then. Again, one of the best pieces of advice, I think, is just ship with a sense of urgency, which is actually advice you doubled down on our first call. So I think that's the most important thing is just kind of you don't honestly know how things in the crypto space are going to pan out. One year the paradigm could be ETH killers, the next could be pro ETH, the next year it could be self-custody, the year after it could be all custodial wallets. The most important thing is shipping quickly enough to iterate.
Yeah, I think this is the thing that a lot of people struggle with, including myself. I mean, I think the hardest thing is to focus on the extreme near term and the extreme long term at the same time, and to kind of ignore like 1 year. And in this space in particular, I think that's important. If you look at like a lot of the most successful NFT projects, they are incredibly reactive. They're shipping things that are relevant to the day and to the week of what's going on in the space. I think where some people struggle is like the opposite, where they have a great long-term vision, but they're not making progress on a day-to-day basis, improving and working toward and actually getting closer to that vision. And so what I hope to do, with what we're doing, and what I think is like the challenge for everybody, is like to actually make progress today on something that gets you to somewhere durable. Because at the end of the day, like hopefully we're building things that last for a while, right? And I know for me, like the most satisfying thing on anything I've done is definitely like things that last for a bit longer than even the length of time you're involved. And so I think that should be the goal for everybody, and that's really what blockchain is all about.
Awesome, guys. Thank you so much. Let's give these guys a round of applause.